The display property is very important. We've learned about block elements in HTML, and we've touched on how to make list items so that they're beside each other instead of each item being on a new line. Now we'll cover how to make an element block or otherwise. First, we're going to cover none. So to hide an element, we style it with display is none. Now if we wanted to hide all paragraphs, we would use the paragraph selector, display as our property, and none as our value. We can apply this to any class or ID, not just entire elements. Now we usually use this hand in hand with JavaScript. When the user clicks something, we can make a certain area show up instantly. It looks like the page is loaded super fast and the user is pleased, when in fact the hidden element was already loaded, but it was just hidden from sight. When you use the display none declaration, your element will not show up at all. No outline or spacer where it should be will appear, and it won't even leave any white space either. But when the element is displayed at a later date using JavaScript, the element will appear instantly and take up the space it originally does, like so. So when I hide this, it looks like there's absolutely nothing there. So when I show the block, it moves everything over because, well, it's now there. Kind of like pulling a Houdini. 1 second it's not there, next second it's there taking up space. Now let's cover our block element. To make an element a block element, we use the display block declaration. A block element will change the element so that it takes up all the space that it can from the left of it to the right of it, and it puts all the content on a new line. So here what we did is we took emphasize, which is just an italic tag, and we displayed it as a block. Typically, EM has a display of inline, which is the default, but this time we changed it to block. So how this will show up is my emphasized word. Now how this typically would show up would be on one line, and it just says my emphasized word, and emphasized would be emphasized. But now that we added the display block, all of our emphasized wording is on a new line like this, and it's going to take up as much room as it can to the left of it and to the right of it, and it's going to take up all of it. Nothing else can share that line. Now you'll notice this with headers like H1 all the way to H6, paragraphs or divs, nothing can go beside them. They like to hog up all the room that they can. Now if we want to fix that, we can change it to an inline. So all we do is we change the display to inline, and here I have an example. It says this is a custom div element, and it shows up like this. By changing the display to inline, our div element, which is typically a block element, is now in line with everything else. Now you also notice that I added a border. Now it's just so you can see exactly where the div is, and a width of 50 pixels. Well, I'm just going to let you know right now that that is not 50 pixels. The inline display will always try and use the smallest amount of space that it can, regardless of the defined width. However, our div element is now in line with all the other words, so it's a little bit of a trade. You can get rid of the block element status, but it also gets rid of the width and puts everything together, or you can just duke it out with block and have the width that you defined. Now an inline display is great for using unordered lists to create a navigation system on your website where each navigation option wraps tightly around the words or images that you're using. You've probably seen a drop-down box where you put your mouse on one of the navigation boxes and something drops down. Well, if you look at the source of that, most times that is used using a list. And when we use a list like that, well, we need to change the display to inline so that we can have more list options beside each other. Now what if you want an element that's inline but has the width that you define? Well, in that case we would use inline block. All we do is we change the display property to inline-block, and that allows us to keep the inline status with the width that we defined. So here is my example. This is a div that is inline and uses the width we defined. It would display this. This is a div that is inline and uses the width we defined. Now you'll notice that the border is around a much larger area. That's around a 100 pixel area, and our div is in line with everything else. So that's the win-win situation of an inline block. When you want to use an inline, you want to take up the least amount of space possible, and if you want to specify a width, use inline block. Now if you want something to be just on its own row entirely, such as a header like H1, you just use the block display, so display:block. There are many more values. The four most popular are block, inline, inline block, and none, which hides it. Then we have a few more to go over. We have inline table. The element is displayed as an inline table. A list item. The element looks just like a block element, it will have that list item marker in front of it. So it'll have a circle or a square or a disk or Roman numerals in front of it. Then we can have display table. The element acts as a table. Table caption acts as a table caption. Table cell. The element is displayed as a table cell, which is TD. Column, table row, and it can also inherit. Now, for the most part, you probably won't use really any of these. That's not to say that you actually won't use them ever. It is good to know because there might be a day that you do use them. But the four most popular are block, inline, inline block, and none.